We're going to make this a little bit more complicated and display a little bit more. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make a div class name equals show-card.
A follow-up to his question.
Sure.
So remember early on when you showed us the style with the two curly braces, right? And then you said, well, a lot of people get uncomfortable with that, so let's pull that out into its own variable and then substitute the style variable. Would that be an option here or not, because we are returning the h, or we're projecting with the map function to the h3? So does that have to happen inside our parentheses?
So you could totally do, so let's just say I would do it up here. You would do it inside the function body, but you could totally do like const preload dot shows dot map show h3 show dot title, right? Const shows, right? So now shows is an array of components, and I could totally right here just say shows. That works just fine. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I was making the assumption that in JSX files, only within component,
like within
class
the returns
definitions do the HTML syntax makes sense, but it looks like anywhere in the file that's
totally
possible.
Yep. And we'll do this later once we start doing like conditionals, right? You can technically put conditionals inside of like the return blocks of JSX. It gets real hairy real quick. So I like to pull them above, store them in variables, and then show them or hide them depending on whether or not they're in the variable or not. So yeah, that's astute. That's a good way of doing things for sure. What I just showed you here is a horrible way of doing it, right? Because this shows would be predetermined. So if anything inside of preload.shows changed, it would not change. But yeah, we won't worry about that for now. Okay, so we're just going to put some components in here. I'm going to put an alt tag on our image because we're good citizens of the internet and we make our things accessible. Show.title, show poster. So take note that that is a backtick, which is the same key as the tilde. This is an ES6 template literal. You are welcome to, I have, again, linked to the Tuality post on template literals if you're not familiar with them, but suffice to say, rather than doing, like if this was a string and I had to do concatenation, oops. That's what it would look like, right? Like we've all seen that syntax before. So with template literals, you can just do this. And then anything between curly braces with the $sign in front of it, which is like the same kind of bashy way of doing it, gets outputted as an expression, and then anything not inside of it is literally the string. Does that make sense? So for like, we have here House of Cards. This will be House of Cards show poster. Okay, and then we're going to do a source for the image, again using our template literal strings. And we're going to do /public /img /posters $sign show.poster. I've included a bunch of posters in your repo, which is where that's coming from. Okay, we're going to do a div. Then we're going to do an h3 and show.title. We're going to do an h4 with show.year. Now for display purposes, I want it to be like parentheses around, so it'll say like, parenthesis 1996 to 2005, end parenthesis. So I want parentheses literally to be output to the DOM. So I'm going to surround this with parentheses. But I just want you to know that it's literally parentheses, right? Okay. And then down here we're going to have a P, which is going to be the show.description. Okay. So now we should be able to save that. And if we come back over here, you should be seeing more stuff, with broken style. You should be seeing broken style, right? The reason why is we're going to go do this with styled components in just a second, probably after the break. But yeah, you should be seeing something like this, right? Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
I'm not sure when the ideal time to talk about this would be, but at least I'm using Atom for doing autocomplete inside of JSX, HTML completion inside of JSX. I noticed there's some happening for you. Do you have some kind of plugin installed?
That does auto-completion?
Yeah. Because right now I'm having to close everything by hand.
Oh.
Which is minorly inconvenient. But
so when I do that, and it just closes the tag?
Exactly.
That is a Sublime thing, which is Alt Command period.
Oh, you're just doing that every time?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
There's probably a better way to do it, but I'm just so used to doing it that you can also use Emmet, right, which is what I was talking about earlier. I don't have it enabled in mine, so I'm not tempted to use it because I hate explaining how to set it up. But that's also possible to use as well. And the idea behind Emmet is you can do this is an HTML, but I can do h1 important thing dot cool thing, and I just hit tab and it just completes into a full element. You can also get this working with JSX. It just takes some finagling and it's very different for each thing. So I don't talk about it.
I might ask you afterwards.
What's that?
I might ask you later about that.
Yeah. The problem with it is it wants to complete to class and not class name.
Oh.
And you also can be fixed as well. But there's a great Stack Overflow question asked by yours truly on how to fix it, and someone answered me. So that's how I fixed it. Okay. So back to Eubeen's question, which is we're in search. We kind of have two things going on here, right? We have the search component, which is the search page, right? It's like the layout for the search page. And then we have these inner show cards, right? So there's kind of two competing ideas here on the page. And so this is where you kind of have to start wondering to yourself, this feels like something I should split out into another component, right? Because I have two ideas going on. So that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to create a new component, call it showcard.jsx. We're going to import React from React. I'm going to say const showcard equals props as a parameter. We're going to go here to search.jsx. We're going to cut that out, come back here to showcard, paste that in. Again, we're going to let Prettier take care of all the details. And then we're going to say export default showcard. And then save, and everything will magically rework itself. You're going to have all sorts of lint errors because we're not doing prop types yet. Oh, and the other thing is show's not defined yet. So props is going to be whatever the parent passes down into showcard, right? So in a moment, we're going to make the parent pass down props.showcard. But in the meantime, anywhere that you reference show, just go in front of it. I'm going to do it with multiple cursors. And say props dot whatever. So now all these are saying where's my prop type, which I think we'll talk about soon here. Yep, very soon we'll be talking about that. Okay, so for now, ignore the lint errors. Go back to search. After this, I'll push a branch, during the break. Okay, now inside of search, we're going to import showcard from /showcard. And then here, where we were, what we're going to do is we're going to return showcard, where show equals show. Okay, there we go. This got a lot cleaner to look at, right? And if you go look, everything should work or look the same as it did before. But now we have two components. We have a show card and we have a search route page. So something that's super advantageous about this approach as well is that imagine later we're building another page that we want to display one show card at a time. Well, now we have this reusable component. As long as we feed it in a show, it doesn't care where it lives. It can display out that information in a useful fashion. So now we get these reusable components that we can put multiple places on our site. So this kind of brings me to talking about how the render method works and kind of the way you need to be thinking about this render method, right? So here, this method here, given a set of props, this is how this component's going to look, right? It's deterministic, it's pure, it's idempotent, right? If I call this function a billion times with the same parameters, right, the same show, on the 1,000,001st time I run this call, what's it going to look like? Exactly the same, nothing changes, right? So this is very, very, very important about React components, is that if you call them a bunch of different times with the same parameters, it's always going to look the same. So for example, it's a terrible idea for me to come in here and say like math.random here, right? That's going to change every single time. So now if I refresh, now what's bad about this, or maybe even worse, we'll talk about that later. And anyway, in any case, this is now non-deterministic, right? So if I call it and I force it to re-render again, which I'll show you how to do later, how to force it to re-render. We have no idea what the component is going to end up looking like. This became non-testable. This became basically not a useful component anymore because it's not deterministic. So given the same properties, the component should always look the same. So like an example that someone might ask me is, well, what happens if I'm dealing with dates, right? Like dates are always changing, right? Well, what you do is you pass in a date to that component, and given that date, it's always going to look the same, right? So you're not reading the date from the interior of the interior of the render method. You should be reading it from the props. Cool. Any questions? It's also super important that these components are going to get run a lot, right? Every time React senses a difference, like if there's an event in your computer, if there's an event in the DOM, if the state changes, if the prop changes, React runs a re-render to figure out what's changed, and then it only updates the things that have changed in the DOM. That's called the virtual DOM. Notice we're already hours into this course and I haven't mentioned the virtual DOM. It doesn't matter, right? It's an implementation detail. It's not important to what actually React is. But anyway, what I want to say is that your render method is going to be run a lot, right? So make sure that code path is very performant, right? Everything else can be slower, right? But that render path needs to be fast because it gets called a lot, especially on large apps.